It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode. And now, welcome your host.
Good to have you on the podcast Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. I'm the host of Omobola Stephen. On Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen, we explore topics that are centered on personal development and self-improvement topics, occasioning professional thought leaders who are adept in the topics of personal development and self-improvement. Now, we always emphasize the need for us to intentionally embrace and focus on personally developing ourselves because when we do so, we tend to find ourselves realizing who we are and also all of the innate potentials and possibilities that life has in store for us, also presenting the beautiful bounties that's always in store for us when we don't give up. Now, embracing personal development and self improvement is a lifelong process. That means it's not something we must give up on. It's something that we must intentionally continue to improve upon in order to see our life transform indeed, and also ensuring that we live a fulfilling life in every area of our life at the end of the day. Thank you, Etienne Labuschagne, for joining me on Live Well Lit by Omobola Stephen. Today, we'll be talking about your intriguing book of children's stories, bedtime stories for clever kids. Now, Etienne is a high court judge, a lawyer, and author. Thank you once again for joining me on the show, and looking forward as we explore on this topic of discussion, especially as highlighted in your book, Bedtime Stories for Clever Kids.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really honored to be on your podcast.
Honored to have you on the show once again. So the first question on the mind of the audience is why the need to raise issues of freedom, self-worth, tolerance, and environment and other important aspects of life in your stories? What do you hope to achieve?
I think it's part of a process of building values into children, into the next generation, that will secure the sustainability of not only our planet, but of welcoming and open societies. The idea is to instill into children when they are young and when they are receptive concepts that go a long way to creating an environment of peace and personal growth for people who are resident in that society.
Are you telling the audience is that your book is focused on the South African people? Why does this have to be so?
It's not focused on South African people. The themes are very often set against a backdrop of Africa and of the animals that we come across in Africa, but the themes are of general application. If you use an example of the first story in the book, it's about freedom. Now, my country has a particular history with freedom in a political sense, but I was trying to introduce the topic to children in a different context. And it's through the vantage point of a little girl who, with her mother, goes to a pet shop and she sees a bird in a cage. It's a beautiful bird. It's a beautiful cage. But she has just walked in from the street where there were geese flying overhead, and she feels that birds should be free. And she feels sorry for this bird. And she says it to her mother. She doesn't think birds should be in cages. And her mother tries to explain to her, yes, that's perhaps true. But for you see it as an entrapment for that bird. That bird might feel safe in that environment, you don't know. But it's another aspect. What looks like captivity to one might look like protection to another. It's just two flip sides of the same concept. Then it develops, and she says, but there's a big parrot sitting on the pet shop owner's shoulder. And it's a bird whose wings have been clipped. Now she says, but Mom, that bird's not in a cage. But he can't fly because his wings have been clipped. So is he free at all? And they see an interaction between the pet shop owner and this bird, and it's quite apparent that they are each other's company. So there was a trade-off for the bird, and she explains that if that bird flew away, he would not be able to look after himself because he has not experienced nature as he was intended to, as he was born. He's been raised and he's only ever fed. So it would be a death sentence for that bird to be released into nature. That's another aspect, that there's a trade-off. But the theme then it develops, and she sees a child being pushed by her father in a wheelchair in a parking lot of the mall. And she feels sorry for this child who's trapped in her body. But then her father pushes her, and they start doing wheelies over the speed bumps in the parking lot, and they turn around, and this girl is squealing with delight. And this girl watches this, and she says, but that girl, she's perhaps in a wheelchair, but it looks very much like her mind is free. And I can just read you the few lines where the conclusion on this topic. The girl thinks she's in a wheelchair, but she's happy. Her mother stares at the laughing girl and her father as they disappear into the mall. Kai thinks a wheelchair is like a cage, but that girl has turned it into a racehorse. She's full of life. She's free. Mommy, she asks, what does it mean to be free? What do you think it means? Her mom answers. I'm confused, she says. Sometimes a cage is not a cage, and sometimes the only cage is in your mind. And this was the idea to show that one single topic has layers, has meanings, has contexts in which it has positives, it has negatives, but it is a topic that parents can then pick up and discuss with their children, age appropriate to their circumstances, so that they can understand that this is a topic which has many angles. And it's for the parents to develop it in a way appropriate for their children, so that they can understand this is a topic that is not just a single concept. It has different aspects to it. I didn't even touch on the history of my country, which is a political issue, and I was trying to focus on children, say age 3 and upwards, to try and keep it age appropriate for them.
All right. Good to know.
There
Thanks
are other topics.
Yes, go ahead.
Another one that's very alive in my country is the issue of tolerance. Tolerance of diversity. You know, my country had a dreadful history of trying to think that there is merit in isolation, when the reality is that diversity enriches, and that there must be an embracing of other people. It is a very live controversy in our society, particularly for visiting immigrants and refugees coming up from the north. But the issue of tolerance, I've tried to explain it through a story about a duck. Now, the type of duck is a mallard duck. It's a duck which is brown, but it has beautiful green feathers and splashes of red. And this Mrs. Mallard, she's an odd duck. And she decides, she and her husband, they're going to start a family, but she's not going to lay her own eggs. So she pinches these eggs from other nests. And then she starts hatching them. And what hatches are firstly chickens, and then geese, then a few ducks, and the last one to hatch, a little crocodile, whose egg looks very much like a chicken egg. And it's an African story, it can happen. Now, this is based on a true life story, the crocodile I added, but either way, the crocodile on being hatched snaps at one of the siblings. And the mother immediately intervenes. She says, no, 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 we don't eat family. And she's trying to create a unity out of these diverse, these hatchlings. And the neighbors are very critical of her, but she and her husband, they are keeping this family together. They take them down to the river. He takes the non-swimmers, she takes the swimmers, and the little crocodile learns to bring tadpoles, and he starts bringing food to his siblings. On the face of it, a harmonious little family. But then the neighbors get critical, and they say, that lady, she can't keep her ducks in a row. And the other people say, but they're not ducks, they're geese. And she hears this. She says, geese? Is this a little goose that I've just hatched? She asks her husband, what do you call a little goose? And he thinks a bit, and he says, you call it a gosling. And here I have my own moment of fun. So I flip up a picture of Ryan Gosling, and the duck says, no, that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound quite right. There's a little joke there for the parents to enjoy. But in the end, the neighbors say, but look at, they're getting along fine. Leave them be. And this is a message of internal tolerance and of neighbors becoming tolerant of diversity, of not your typical family, but everything works if it's covered by love. And this mother does a good job, scatterbrained as she is, of bringing her family together as a unit simply by loving them.
Oh, thanks for brilliantly sharing that with my audience, Etienne. And so at what point did you finally decide you want to follow your childhood passion to paint and illustrate a book?
You know, I started as a school kid painting. I was a schoolboy in Durban, and my parents had a business, and I was about 12 and bored during school holidays. They were keeping business hours. I had nowhere to go. I was living right on the beach, so it's not as though I had nothing to do. But a neighbor then, who was a painter, she said, well, let me show you something. And she taught me some painting methods. And I thought, well, I've got a knack for this. I sort of picked it up and I started running with it. And I haven't stopped. So the painting came first. As far as children's stories are concerned, it runs. It's basically three unfortunate events that have brought this issue together. First, that was that I married and I had 2 children. Both of them had alignment problems with their legs. So at age 5, they had to undergo bilateral osteotomies, just above the knee. The bone was severed, and they had to realign the legs, put in pins. They were in plaster of Paris for 2 months, totally stationary, and had to learn to walk all over again. And I was at that time a practicing advocate, and to assist my wife, who was with these children, I started dictating onto my recording device, just stories, just at will, as they came up. I started dictating stories to keep them occupied, particularly my daughter. She was the second one. And she kept these tapes. And she gave them back to me. So I had them transcribed and I illustrated them because they are little stories within the family. Our grandmother, she plays a very prominent role. And I could illustrate this and give it back to her because she herself has a little girl now. So this is my grandfather's gift now to my granddaughter. Same stories, just further illustrated. And then in 2017, this little girl, she's only 2 years old now. And in 2017, my wife died, and I went through a period of grieving. And the idea of grandchildren was really keeping me going. The hope that I'd one day see them. And this little girl, I knew what her name would be because her grandmother had chosen that name, and my daughter liked it. So I knew what a little girl's name would be. And I started writing stories to her as a way of sort of casting an anchor into the future and hoping that it would hook me along so that I could meet her one day. But if I didn't get to see her, at least she would hear my voice through stories. And those stories then started developing. And by the time COVID struck, and I realized that there are families with small children trapped in apartments, and these parents have to keep these children occupied. And I thought that's a nightmarish scenario, very tough. And I started disseminating stories that I'd written, and I was writing them regularly, just sending them to everybody with small children on social media, telling them, spread, spread, spread. You deserve a break. Everybody deserves a break, particularly at bedtime. This was 10 minutes of peace when parents could just talk to their children at the end of a day and have something new to discuss. So through that process, I built up quite a few collections of stories, and this is one of them that the publishers liked and said they want to publish this one.
All right, good to know. So what do you think is the importance of bedtime stories for parents and the kid?
I think communication between parent and child is vital. It's vital to unlocking potential. It's vital into instilling self-worth and validation into children, and it's vital to make them inquisitive about things they haven't thought about or haven't known about. And bedtime is that special time of the day when children are tired, but they are receptive. It's a teaching opportunity for parents, but not in a heavy way. These stories are presented with a very light hand, and there are lots of illustrations that will entertain. And the idea is that parents would then use these stories as a base to talk to their children and to show, to discuss what happened in this story. They're not typical stories. It's not a simple storyline, although what happens is fun, and it's full of color and movement, etc. The themes do develop, and they develop in a way that I think bright kids will pick it up. Parents will be able to discuss the quirks and the changes, how a theme is developed. I'll give you an example. One of the stories is written from the vantage point of a chessboard. This chessboard gives a big sigh. Now, chessboards don't sigh, but this one does, because it feels trapped in 2 dimensions. It knows forward and backwards, and it knows sideways. But it can feel a game being played on top of it in a dimension that it can't access. And it feels frustrated and wants to know more about this other dimension. So this story is about the topic of dimensions. And it starts off and it ends with the chessboard, hearing what is going on. What then happens, and this is another level of a meaning attached to the word dimensions, is that a chess master tries to teach a little boy how to improve his chess. And he says to him that I'm going to lift your game to another level. I want to teach you strategy. I'm going to lift your game into another dimension. And suddenly the word has a different meaning. And he then plays a game with this little boy, and he sees, he does something that triggers a response strategically from this kid to counter an attack on his queen. And the chess master says, I can see you understand already how to protect your players. You have understood strategy, which is another dimension. But then the little boy loses the game and he's feeling downtrodden. And the chess master says to him, I want to to tell you that you played well and your best is good enough. And if you have lost, you will learn. And what you learn from losing is valuable because next time you will play better. So he's teaching him a little life lesson. That's another dimension. The little boy responds and he finds out. He tells the chess master that they're going through a family crisis. His father's lost his job. They have to emigrate. And he uses a very old painting of a chess game to try and teach this boy something like hope. And it's a game, it's a very old painting. It's a game between the devil and a chess master. And he says to him, look at this painting. First, the little boy says, I shouldn't be looking at this. And he says, no, trust me, I want to show you something. He says, look at the board game. And the boy looks at the board game, but he says, the devil's going to win. He's going to take the queen. And the chess master says to him, look further, look at the king. And then that dawns on the little boy to see that although he might sacrifice his queen, the king then steps in and it's checkmate. He wins the game. So he tries to teach this little boy, don't think it's game over when something like this happens in your family. Keep your eye on the king. There's always one more move. There's hope. And he tries to impart a thought which is probably, it's on a spiritual level, but it's for parents to pick it up and use it appropriately for children to give them the idea that sometimes you can't walk by sight, you have to believe. And there has to be something that gives you hope that you can cling to in future. And this story gives that dimension then to a life problem. So one simple story, it uses the concept of dimensions. It gets 3-4 different levels, and it's for the parents to pick it up and to discuss it with their children, age appropriately, to teach them something. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, sure. The importance of bedtime story for parents and child cannot be overemphasized. Thanks for sharing that importance. But really, in terms of the modern day child, who will rather prefer to play games, watch movies, socialize, and learn all they can on their tech devices? Do you think it's easy for a parent, to draw the attention of this child to storytelling, especially in the area of allowing them or helping them to learn the art of listening, which I think it's the struggle for children in this modern day age. What's your take on that?
I think that parents must realize that the electronic era has good aspects to it, but it has a downside if it means that children stop reading. Because the art of reading is not only a skill for life, it is a skill of instruction, of entertainment, and personal growth that takes place for life. And I was particularly delighted when a colleague of mine, to whom I'd given a copy of my book, came back, and he has a boy who is very much into electronics, computer games, etc. And this book intrigued him. And on the way to school, he would tell his mom, please turn down the radio, I'm reading. And the fact that this book got this little boy, and he's 10 years old, started him reading and getting interested in things that he would not have otherwise been exposed to, because if you just keep on pressing buttons and things happen, etc., you're never challenged in a way that you are when you have to assimilate words and attach meaning to them and get pulled into a story and a pattern of thought, which in itself will create neural paths that are stimulating and will enhance this child's thinking. So I do understand that the devices, modern devices that children are exposed to can teach them dexterity and concepts useful for modern life. The need to read will never go away, and it needs to be enhanced in a way where it is not seen as work, but is seen as it's as vital as breathing. It's a way of assimilating information and being exposed to thoughts. And this is a book that will teach children you're not going to learn this out of a computer game. You might learn a bit about strategy, but you're not going to learn about life skills. You're not necessarily going to be exposed to lessons that are demonstrated in a few pages in a bedtime story.
Thank you once again, Etienne, for sharing your thoughts on this important topic. Talking about the appetite during your time in South Africa, what was life like? What's the experience that you think is going to add value to the audience? You can share your experience and your background and lessons to take along.
Yes. Well, let me explain my family setup. I'm the youngest of three. And I was born, my father was working on a sugar estate north of Durban. Sugarcane is the name of the game. Farming in sugarcane takes place for a few hundred kilometers up the coast. And my parents, we were living on a farm where some of the farm workers, they were living in close proximity to the house where my parents lived. And my brother and sister got exposed in a very natural way to other children their age. They would play together. And in the process, they both learned to speak Zulu. I was a little baby when we moved away from that place, and we moved into a large sugar estate where the residential areas were segregated. I was clueless as a child. This was the reality in which I grew up. But the result of just that single move meant that I was not exposed to children of different races, of different languages. And I did not pick up the skill, the language skill that I desperately need in the job that I'm doing. My sister now lives in Canada. My brother lives in Australia. What use is Zulu to them there? I was deprived of that opportunity of being exposed to children and learning language as anybody does through immersion, etc. And that's one of the things that I'm a bit angry about, because it's a life skill that I would love to have been able to speak the language better than I do. It's not that I have no language skills at all. I would have been better if I had exposure to other children. It was only during high school that a Rotary Club arranged for a group of what they called student leaders to go on a week together. And I got exposed to teenagers of all the other communities and found out that we are pretty much the same. We want the same things. We work hard at school. We have dreams and ideals. We want to do good for our families. We want our country to be a good place to live in. And found out that, this is a vantage point that I should have had, and they should have had it as far as I was concerned. And that was just absent. And the concept of apartheid, as you sort of grew into it, it looked unbreakable. And when I went to university to study law, there's one seminal event that sort of hit me in my gut as far as the idea of apartheid was concerned. And that was when an American talk show host called Ted Koppel came to South Africa, and he did interviews. And he had one specific interview with two journalists. The one was a man called Percy Kobosa, who was the editor of a black newspaper. The other one was Otto Krauser, who was a journalist with a typically white newspaper. And they were talking to it, had this interview with one another, and the sparks were flying during this interview. And Kobosa was very resentful, and Krauser was trying to say, no, but we have to work together, and this is a country of opportunity, and trying to put a good spin on the politics. And the next day, Ted Koppel reported that after the taping, Krauser invited Kobosa to go for a drink after the interview. And Kobosa said to him, I hope you choke. And it hit me in the gut to think that this political system that I grew up in could create such resentment, such deep-seated dislike. It's a destructive thing. And it was like my eyes went open at that stage, regrettably late. And I was quite shattered to think of how much potential we lost during those years of blindness. Luckily, that's all changed. You see it in the schools nowadays. Schools is it's a melting pot of South African society. City schools, I'm speaking of specifically. Children are exposed to one another naturally. English has become a very strong binding language for most. Many have a home language, and then they have English at school. But these children are building up relationships in a totally natural way. You see it. I can see it in young candidate attorneys that come my way. Many of them, although they're of different racial groups, they were at school together, they know one another, and they engage on legal topics like anybody having an argument, and they would be able to stand their ground. This is natural society. And it wasn't like that for a very long time. And I think it has improved so much. From my time to now, I think our country is in so much better a place, just as far as the youth is concerned. It's not free of problems. There are many, many, many problems still around, but at least being exposed to one another in a natural way and getting to know each other as people. That is the main advantage that I see in the modern society that we are living in.
Etienne, do you have any important information, perhaps a project you think is going to add value to the audience? You can share that if you have any.
Anything specific? Look, the book introduces topics of self-validation. Children need to hear from their parents that they are loved, and they need to hear from their parents that they are okay. And some of the stories deal with that topic of being validated. And I I use it as in the context of a story, the middle-aged story in the Middle Ages in Edinburgh. And I'm using street dogs as the example. Street dogs who are always being shouted at and chased away, etc. And suddenly the king calls out a competition for Dog of the Year. And there's one specific dog. There's another story in which he plays a role. His name is Rufus. And he's walking with his master, and he persuades his master to enroll all these street dogs into the competition. And they all happen to be in the castle during the day when the Vikings attack the King of Scotland, and the dogs protect the king, and they drive away the enemy. And then suddenly all these dogs are adopted into the king's guard, and they become validated. Where previously they were rejected, their value was seen through a crisis. And I think that this was just a little story, just to show that sometimes it takes something for a parent who doesn't express sentiment about validating a child might just take one thing to get that parent to say, I love you just the way you are. And to instill in a child a sense of confidence, because a child who feels validated feels safe. And from there, personal growth is the next thing on which a child can focus. A child who feels safe and grounded becomes inquisitive about the world out there and starts breaking barriers. And that's the type of child that I feel should be sent out into the world, well-rounded and inquisitive and confident in own abilities.
All right, so can you share your social media handles or your website? Perhaps the bookstore, we can get your book, get connected with you, learn more about what you've been up to. So come on, you can share.
Sure.
If you have.
Okay, look, as far as getting hold of my book is concerned, it's available on the online platform of the publisher. The publisher is Austin Macaulay. They're based in London, but they are worldwide. It's also available from Amazon. It's available at Google Books. And in the United States, it's also available at the big bookstores. It's at Barnes & Noble. It's even available at Target. So the big stores, the bookstores, you'll probably find it if you can't ask for it. But yeah, as I don't have a very strong presence on social media, but I do have my art. My art is on Instagram. You can view it at art by Etienne with underscores between. And a lot of the artwork ends up in the stories, because I find that when I'm telling a story, I recall something that will carry the narrative. So you have a combination of paintings and illustrations that carry the stories. And there's a multitude of illustrations in the book. I've really gone to town on that. So it's that's as much as I can say. It's been a pleasure. The book was featured at the Frankfurt Book Fair. It was recently featured at the London Book Fair. And yes, I hope that the American audience enjoys it, because if they do, there's a lot more where those came from. I've got lots of ideas, and I keep on writing stories as things progress. You were talking about modern developments. I recently wrote one about artificial intelligence, and I had a great fun of setting up a fight between Siri and Alexa. Children sparking a fight between these two artificial intelligence characters, and in the end learning how to use them. And that's the bottom line. Artificial intelligence is there. It has many good things to it. It can also be abused, but we will have to learn a lot more to obtain the advantages of artificial intelligence. Yes, it's been a joy writing these stories. There are 11 of them, and I've used in many instances the animals of Africa to illustrate these stories. One of them was about cuckoos. A cuckoo is a bird that lays its egg in another bird's nest, and it's raised. And that little story is used in the end, to introduce the topic of adoption. Adoption is a difficult topic to introduce with a light touch, but this particular story ends up being about adoption, about somebody else raising your child, and how sometimes it's better for the child. And the child, if the child gets that perspective, it becomes much easier to accept the fact that your adoption wasn't a rejection. It was an improvement, because your parents knew what's best for you. It's a different perspective on a difficult topic.
All right, thanks for sharing all of these important takeaways in your book, Bedtime Stories for Clever Kids. It's really been a worthwhile time having you, Etienne Labuschagne, on the show. You are an High Court judge, a lawyer, and author. Share profound insight and very important takeaways we can learn both as parents and a child in these bedtime stories for clever kids. Sincerely from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of the audience of Library Omobola Stephen, we wish you best of luck in this book project and in all the projects that you're going to have in the nearest future.
Thank you so much, Omobola. I really appreciate it, and I love talking to you. My best wishes to your audience.
Thank you once again. I'm humbled by that. If you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the podcast, remember you can do so on any podcast distribution platforms or any podcast promotion platforms to bump into online and do have a great time. Listen to the show and being transformed in and out with disruptive yet constructive mind shift insight from professionals and thought leaders who have been there and done that as regards personal development and self-improvement topics. Now, don't forget to leave a review and also give a 5-star rating if you may when you come across the podcast Library by Omobola Stephen. We will sincerely appreciate you for doing that. Till I come your way, I need you always to stay safe. My name is Omobola Stephen once again. Thank you for joining me. And thank you, Etienne Labuschagne, for your time and also for the valuable contribution to the topic of discussion. It was really worthwhile indeed.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.